Hey there, and welcome to today's Explainer. So, today we're diving into something really fascinating. Why is it that some companies just absolutely thrive when everything goes to chaos, while others, even the really successful, incredibly well-funded ones, literally just collapse under the pressure? We're going to explore this huge divide using a groundbreaking framework by researcher Rodolfo Henriquez de Oliveira. We are focusing the whole explainer on what he calls adaptive capacity. We'll break down exactly what that actually means, how it works, and how you can figure out if your own organization actually has it, or, if they're just pretending to.
16,700. That's a staggering number, right? That is the exact number of flights Southwest Airlines had to cancel over just a few days during Winter Storm Elliott back in 2022. It wasn't just a bad week at the office. It was a complete top-to-bottom systemic meltdown. We're talking over 2 million passengers completely stranded in airports all over the country, sleeping on floors, frantically searching for lost luggage. But here's the real puzzle. Southwest wasn't some rookie fly-by-night operation. I mean, historically, they were known for being this incredibly efficient, finely tuned machine with decades of institutional knowledge.
Which brings us to the central question we really need to answer. Why do smart, super efficient organizations suddenly fail when conditions change? Why does all that collective intelligence just completely break down when they get hit with a novel disruption? Oliveira actually calls this the modern intelligence problem. Because look, it's not like these companies are run by people who aren't smart or competent. The executives are sharp, the managers know exactly what they're doing, and the frontline workers absolutely know their jobs.
The problem isn't a lack of information. I mean, modern organizations have insane amounts of data, highly specialized expertise, and literally more computing power than ever before in human history. The real bottleneck? It's the interfaces. It's that critical space where distributed, highly specialized knowledge from totally different departments has to be transformed into coordinated, actionable judgment, and it has to happen fast enough to actually matter. Just think about how often vital intel from the front lines just, dies in some unread email thread or gets completely watered down in a massive committee meeting. By the time the actual information makes it up the chain of command, the reality on the ground is already completely changed.
Okay, let's dive into this by looking at how we've conventionally viewed organizations. For decades, we've relied on this really outdated machine metaphor. You know the one? It relies on linear reasoning, strict top-down central control, and standardizing every single moving part. It basically assumes that when something breaks, leadership can just, tighten a process or swap out a bad component from the top. But modern, global networks, they just don't work like gears and cogs anymore. We're dealing with the organism metaphor now. This requires systemic reasoning, where intelligence is distributed across this massive nervous system, and every action is deeply interdependent. You simply can't command a complex organism from a single disconnected central brain anymore. It just doesn't work.
So, to survive as an organism in a rapidly changing environment, you need adaptive capacity. Oliveira formally defines this as the emergent system property expressed in the ability of a complex social system to remain intelligently related to changing reality while preserving systemic coherence. Okay, I know that's a seriously dense academic definition, so let's pull it out of the textbook for a second. In conversational terms, it's basically about sustaining your current performance while simultaneously developing the conditions to respond to whatever wild curveball gets thrown at you next. It's about sensing change, judging it, and then coordinating action as one coherent whole, all without tearing the actual organization apart in the process.
Now, we need to be very clear about what we are actually looking at here, because it's not just agility. It's not just resilience or decentralization or flexibility or innovation. If you play corporate buzzword bingo, you might think adopting a few of these traits means you're adaptable. But while these buzzwords absolutely do matter, none of them alone explain how a system adapts as a whole. Think about it. You can be incredibly agile, but just end up accelerating a totally fragmented, chaotic response. Or you could radically decentralize decisions, but end up fracturing your responsibility so much that literally no one knows who's in charge. Adaptive capacity is the overarching architecture that actually lets all these pieces work together systemically.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because this capacity is actually constructed across Oliveira's 4 core dimensions. The first one is the mechanics of movement. Basically, think of this as the physical travel of information. Signals, decisions, and resources actually have to propagate across organizational boundaries. If critical information can't move smoothly from the ground floor all the way up to the C-suite, or if the feedback loops are broken, the system simply cannot adapt. It's kind of like having a nerve ending that feels pain, but the signal never actually reaches the brain to tell the hand to pull away.
The second dimension is the mechanics of structure. Because, movement needs actual pathways to travel on. Structure gives your interaction a durable, reliable form. We're talking about specific roles, decision rights, technologies, and daily routines. Without structure, any coordination relies entirely on personal influence, heroic late-night efforts, or super informal workarounds. Think of the difference between a panicked, chaotic, late-night Slack channel and a clear, highly dependable incident response protocol. We desperately need dependable pathways where responsibility is crystal clear and the organization's memory is actually preserved.
Dimension 3 is the dynamics of evolution. Look, a system can't just blindly repeat what worked yesterday and somehow expect to survive tomorrow. It absolutely has to maintain deep contact with its environment, it has to generate and select new responses, and it has to continuously experiment. If you're just running yesterday's successful playbook today, you aren't evolving, you're just stagnating. Evolution is what ensures the organization is constantly renewing its bag of tricks, rather than just endlessly reproducing the habits that were created by its old, outdated successes.
Finally, we reach the fourth and, I would argue, the most crucially human dimension, integrative capacity. You could have massive amounts of data flowing through perfect structures, and you could be generating brilliant new ideas every day, but it means absolutely nothing without this. Integrative capacity is that distinctly human ability to bring completely different signals, conflicting perspectives, and real-world consequences into responsible collective judgment. It's the crucible where all that distributed human intelligence actually transforms into coordinated action. Because at the end of the day, raw data without human judgment is just noise.
So, how do you keep all this distributed intelligence from just flying apart into total chaos? Well, you need gravity. Gravity is this invisible force. It's the shared orientation, the purpose, the deep meaning that lets participants act on what they're seeing locally without having to wait for continuous, micromanaged instruction from above. Gravity is what keeps a highly decentralized, fast-moving team totally aligned. It ensures they don't accidentally fracture the company's core identity while they're off trying to solve local problems.
When you combine all four of those dimensions with that powerful gravitational pull, you achieve what's called structural integrity. This is the true load-bearing condition of any organization. It's maintained when your information, authority, judgment, responsibility, action, and consequence all remain tightly coupled together across time and scale, even as external conditions are wildly fluctuating. If you accidentally sever authority from responsibility, or say information from action, that structural integrity just completely crumbles.
Okay, so how does this theoretical framework actually play out in the real world? Let's step out of the abstract for a minute and look at some starkly contrasting case studies to really prove this out. We're going to start with Nokia's famous struggle with the smartphone transition, and then we're going to compare that directly to Toyota's completely remarkable recovery after a massive, devastating earthquake.
Let's deconstruct Nokia first. A lot of people out there think Nokia simply missed the smartphone trend, that they just didn't see Apple coming. But actually, that is not true at all. The source material shows they had incredibly high technical awareness. The signals were absolutely there on the ground, but their integrative capacity was entirely blocked by this pervasive culture of fear. Senior leaders put immense, totally unforgiving pressure on middle managers to deliver short-term results, and those middle managers were literally too terrified to pass negative but highly necessary information up the chain. The real tragedy here is that the signals never became executive judgment, and that short-term pressure completely displaced their long-term survival.
Now, contrast that tragic breakdown with Toyota in 2011. A massive earthquake hits Japan, devastating 659 of their suppliers. No central executive sitting in a boardroom could possibly know how to fix a supply chain disaster of that magnitude all by themselves. But Toyota used their formal hierarchy not to dictate top-down solutions, but to actively support networked adaptation. They mobilized the distributed technical judgment of engineers across hundreds of different suppliers to rapidly coordinate a recovery. And crucially, they evolved. They took the lessons learned and created the rescue information system, ensuring they could handle future shocks even faster.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference. Nokia was crippled by fear-shaped boundaries. They had the technical signals, sure, but they fundamentally failed to integrate that knowledge, which led directly to fragmentation and irrelevance. Toyota, on the other hand, represents true adaptive capacity. It's networked adaptation, where the hierarchy actually serves to mobilize distributed intelligence. They successfully integrated local knowledge, turned it into coordinated action, and that led directly to their evolution and survival.
Let's bring this full circle back to Southwest Airlines, our hook from the beginning. Southwest was an incredibly efficient system under normal, sunny conditions. But when Winter Storm Elliott caused those cascading cancellations, their underlying software and operational systems just couldn't integrate the network-wide data fast enough.
Crew reassignment, aircraft recovery, and customer assistance became mutually constraining, meaning solving one problem literally worsened another. They were highly optimized for normal efficiency, which actually turned into a massive trap. They severely lacked the integrative capacity needed for dynamic recovery when faced with a rapidly cascading disruption.
Next, let's briefly look at the boundaries of decentralization by comparing two very different companies, Favi and Zappos. At the French manufacturer Favi, faced with a severe economic downturn, the CEO completely opened the books and shared the harsh economic reality directly with the workers. Given that shared reality, that gravity we talked about, the workers quickly and unanimously agreed to a pay cut to save temporary jobs. Shared purpose works wonderfully when people directly carry the consequence of their decisions. But pause for a second and contrast that with Zappos when they enthusiastically adopted holacracy. They pushed formal structural decentralization so fast that 14% of the workforce simply up and quit. Distributing authority on paper is completely useless if it outpaces your people's actual capacity to inhabit those new roles. You just can't mandate adaptability.
Building adaptive capacity isn't about picking a side between extreme corporate control or extreme startup chaos. It's about expertly managing what Oliveira calls necessary tensions. You are constantly having to balance local speed, letting frontline workers act fast, with system-wide integration so the whole company actually stays aligned. You have to balance standardization for safety against experimentation for growth. You have to deliver present, quarterly performance while simultaneously investing in long-term renewal. The secret? You don't ever permanently solve these tensions. You create robust structures to continuously govern and navigate them.
Which leads us to a crucial diagnostic principle from our source material. Oliveira states, adaptive capacity is constrained by the relationship least able to carry the adaptive demand within a defined domain and time horizon. Okay, in plain terms, if you want to diagnose your own organization, you have to find a binding constraint. You have to locate the exact weakest link in your organizational relationships. It's that specific bottleneck that is actively preventing raw, on-the-ground information from becoming responsible, coordinated action. Fix that one link and the whole system levels up. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how AI fits into all of this. Because a lot of executives today think AI is the ultimate silver bullet solution to the intelligence problem. And yes, absolutely, AI dramatically expands our awareness and our computation. It can detect patterns in global supply chains instantly. But, and this is vital, only humans can bear consequence. The integrative function, where raw information acquires actual meaning, moral obligation, and accountability, remains a deeply, fundamentally human task. AI can process millions of signals in a second, but it literally cannot feel the weight of the trade-offs it suggests.
So, the crucial point here is that adaptive capacity is organically cultivated over time. It's not something you can just install overnight like a new software update. It's an ongoing, living cycle. Step 1. Your organization encounters a changing reality. Step 2. You form distributed, collective judgment based on that new reality. Step 3. You take responsible, deeply coordinated action. And step 4, you absolutely must gregariously return those consequences back into the system to reshape and improve how you respond the next time around.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to take back to your own teams and leadership meetings. When conditions invariably change tomorrow, will your organization's distributed intelligence become smooth, coordinated action, or will it just dissolve into disconnected, panicked noise? Do you have the genuine structural integrity to adapt and evolve, or are you just sitting there waiting for the next big storm to completely break your system? Thank you so much for learning with us today. Keep asking those hard questions and keep building that adaptive capacity.